So with this, we come to the next and the last session for today. This session will focus on restoring personal well-being. How do we sustain a happier world? I'm also a yoga trainer, so this session is of special interest to me. I was just discussing with the panelists. To moderate this, I have the pleasure of welcoming Geeta Kumar, who is a big well-being advocate, founder of Pragati Partners for Success, and also my mentor when it comes to spirituality and well-being. Without taking any more time, over to you, Geeta.
Thank you, Nikita. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Delighted to join you from the capital city of India, New Delhi. I have a rich, very rich panel for our session today on restoring personal well-being, sustaining a happier world. All our panelists bring diverse lived personal experiences alongside their professional expertise. So let me briefly introduce them. Sohaila Khan, she's the country manager, program manager for the UN Women's Economic Empowerment. Her work focuses on integrating feminist principles and strategies in programs to enable women to recognize and challenge gender-based discrimination with the aim to advance their economic rights. Personally, she recharges with a 7-year-old daughter who bombards her daily with 10,000 questions. Literally and figuratively, that keeps Sohaila alert from head to toe. Welcome, Sohaila. Bhavna. Bhavna is the founder and CEO of Caregiver Sathi, who effortlessly wears multiple hats. Ever since I've known her, she's been able to transition to align with her purpose and passion. And she likes to be known as a calm, passionate person. Probably that's the only trait that gets her to do what she does. She's an avid biker who experiences her body-mind connect while riding. She calls herself a tech geek and also crochets in her leisure time. Dr. Varudhini Kankipati is co-founder at Inner Connect. She's a practicing psychologist who specializes in individual, marriage, family, and group psychotherapy. Working with children, adolescents, and adults, she works across a gamut of behavioral and mental health issues: depression, anxiety, attention issues, addiction, abuse, grief, and loss, and some of them. She enjoys reading, is very active in her book club, loves to travel and watch interesting television serials, and she aspires to learn pottery in the future. Welcome, Varunadi and Bhavna. Let's go to the last panelist, Sunu. Sunu Vadewala is a human resources professional currently heading HR at Axis Securities. Her educational background is in organizational psychology, which she very intentfully leverages to bring in the importance of physical and mental well-being of employees at the workplace. She believes that a happy employee leads to a happy workplace with improved individual and organizational productivity. Very simple mantra, I must say. Sunu has been a key pillar in building a well-being culture in her organization. In fact, Axis Security has very recently been recognized as one of the top 10 happiest workplaces by Business World. She practices yoga and meditation to keep herself centered and is also an avid traveler. A really warm welcome to all of you and to our audience today. So let me begin by, let's define what exactly are we meaning by well-being. Well-being encompasses autonomy, for the freedom to make one's own decisions. It's self-acceptance that creates satisfaction and happiness within ourselves. A mastery and the ability to manage everyday situations and to be productive along the way. Managing positive relationships with families, friends, and the others. Ability to cope with normal stresses of life. A sense of purpose or meaning in life. The ability to make meaningful contributions within the larger community. Which means really, well-being is an all-encompassing phenomenon that impacts every individual's physical, mental, emotional, and financial. So, why are we in this conversation today in this conference. Why are women's well-being really an issue at all? Let's talk about it a little bit as I set the context. Traditionally, a woman bear a fourfold burden. I'm adding this typically in theoretical and academia, it's called the triple burden. But we are talking about domestic labor that includes caregiving. We're talking about economic labor that contributes to the family income. We're looking at reproductive labor to propagate the family lineage. And fourthly, the emotional labor that is responsibility for the welfare of their families, creating an ecosystem that is happy and comfortable for all. It's a real tall order. And unfortunately, to meet all these demands, women really pay a heavy price. It's a sacrifice of their own well being. The post COVID era has brought an even sharper focus on the alarming negative impact on women's well being. Increased domestic and caregiving responsibilities, increase in the domestic violence, sexual abuse, myriad mental health issues, which also result ultimately in women dropping off the workforce. While it is getting highlighted more now than earlier, there seems to be a growing awareness of this exponential detrimental impact. It's very limited and it's available only to a few. Across majority of the world, women still bear the burden of unrealistic expectations on all the four labor, as discussed, just a few minutes ago. And you know what? That's not all. They are subject to a host of discrimination, unequal access to resources and opportunities, abuse, both at work and at home, and are then still expected to give everyone happiness and comfort. So let's deep dive into this subject and look at this issue. What we're going to be doing in the next 55 minutes, we will first look at the structural issues. How does it play out at the personal front for the women? The barriers encountered for women's well-being. And then we look at also some of the good practices that organizations, institutions are undertaking. What ought to be done more? And finally, we will also look at the lived realities for many women out there, especially on the mental health issues and challenges. We'll keep the last 10 minutes, if possible, to address audience questions, which would be for the panelists, before wrapping up with the session takeaways. While let me just few housekeeping rules. It's a virtual platform, therefore it allows the audience engagement through chats. So requesting all of you out there, audiences, please engage, participate actively throughout the session, and keep sharing your comments, insights, and questions. So let me begin. Sohela, can you tell us what are some of the structural barriers to enhancing well-being of women? What has been done in this area? And most importantly, what are the key challenges that needs to be addressed? And who are those people who need to address this?
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to this very, very important consultation. And thank you for your question, Geeta. I have been working in the area of gender and livelihoods for quite some time now. And I have recognized through our work that, for any positive change in the lives of women, especially around their economic autonomy and economic agency, we must appreciate and address the structural constraints that they face, as well as the discriminatory norms, attitudes, practices, etc. Now, increasingly, the violence that women are facing at the digital spaces. We know that we have seen the violence that women face at the workplace, at public and private spaces, but increasingly now on digital spaces as well. But also the fact that it is very, very important for a woman to recognize herself as an economic agent, and that her identity is not just of that of a woman, a wife, or a daughter, but she also is an individual right holder with autonomy, with voice, choice, and agency, which means that they should, and women should also appreciate that there is a difference in their access to equal opportunities and resources. And this is something which is coming again by the structural constraints, discriminatory norms, as well as policies to some extent, right? you touched upon the fact, Geeta, that the unpaid burden of care that women face is really, really phenomenal. So in India, it is really the women who perform 10 times more work than men, compared to 4.8 times globally. Now, this means that they have limited opportunities for greater participation in economic, social, political lives, even leisure, which definitely have an impact on their well-being. Now, when it comes to policy spaces, India has many, many progressive legislations. There are notifications that remove restrictions on women's work in factories, mines, etc. Then there is legislation around appointment of women as board members. We have maternity policies. We have really sexual harassment at workplace policies, etc. But the implementation has been challenged, notwithstanding the fact that globally, corporations, and I'm sure that Sonu would talk about it, corporations are increasingly recognizing the value of gender equality and the business case of gender equality, and how looking at their policies and practices to get more women at various levels of the leadership and at various levels of management within the organization. UN Women has been very, very proud to work with private sector companies on looking at their and advising them on their policies and practices to review it from the gender lens through a tool called Women's Empowerment Principles. However, despite all this, the labor force participation rate in India is falling, and it's declining since past 2 decades. And we stand at close to 20%, which is really, really very, it's a matter of concern. Now, this poor participation of women in the labor force has really been attributed to many factors, including, lack of job opportunities. Also, some say that the family incomes have increased and therefore there's more stability and therefore women do not want to work. What it has does is that it has resulted in a traditional division of labor within family. And you pointed out the fact that, and which COVID, by the way, aggravated. Impacted by unsafe working conditions, wage disparity, and also women's lack of technical skills. And again, social cultural norms that relegate women to domestic spaces. A UN study in India, as well as other 6 countries, found that if unpaid labor carried out by women were to be assigned monetary value, it would make up around 10 to 39% of GDP. So what can be done? In my opinion, the efforts around promoting gender equality, which means that women and men and those who identify themselves beyond binary have equal access to rights, responsibilities, and opportunities in all spheres. And that is also why the global framework of sustainable development goals not only has a standalone goal on gender equality and women's empowerment, but also gender is seen very, very critical and very, very important element in achieving all other sustainable development goals that have a positive impact on societies. So when it comes to role, of course, everybody has a role to play: government, corporations, civil society, family members, and women themselves, which means that definitely we need progressive corporate and public policies. We also need to recognize, reduce, redistribute, and reward women's care and unpaid burden, but also create equal opportunities for women for economic, social, political, and leisure activities. So I'll take a pause here, Geeta, and hand it over to you.
Thank you, Sohaila. Yes, and I think the key takeaways is, in terms of action, the rights, resources, and opportunity. And I think this whole access, if it is made available, I think it's a great place to, begin work with. Actually, it impacts everything, when you look at, and it's such a simple, women or the gender per se is the most elementary organizing principle of society, where 50% of people can be so easily distributed across the 2 binaries, and yet there is so much disparity. And thank you so much for calling that out. I'll come back with the following follow-up question subsequently. So let me now move and make a segue into what Bhavna does. And here's the Bhavna, it's really amazing, the organization that you have put together. It's a much needed space. caregiver Sati to provide well-being for caregivers who are mostly women. Often we see them struggling. It's a very lonely space, and it's, you have to do it in spite or despite their own needs. So I'd like to ask you, what is the impact on the self-care due to this gendered nature of roles? Even Sohela called out at homes, and it works for both, the working and the non-working women, whether it's caregiving, whether it's the domestic chores, whether it is parenting, or any of the others. So could you just tell us where did it all stem from, and how can we now move the needle, look at this more holistically for women?
Thank you, and thank you for putting together this lovely conversation platform. I think, ever since you reached out to me for the first time, my mind has been ticking about so many aspects that we have tried to touch upon. The conversation in preparing for this has been such a lovely run up. So, kudos. Having said that, thank you very much for the kind words for Caregiver Sathi as well. Simple short story, while I could go on, like I have said, for many days, is the fact that when I hit upon my midlife crisis, I realized the one thing that I have been and known the closest is the challenges of being a caregiver. So I could say that I have been a caregiver for more than 30 years. First for my father, and then, a set of other family members. And caregiving can be a fairly lonely, challenging, and unpredictable journey. And I'm going to ask you or many others who are listening to this is to think about, what is the Indian equivalent word for a caregiver? I I was struck by when I realized that we don't have an equivalent word for caregiver in any of the Indian languages.
Wow.
What does that
It's
say about us and our culture? And I
inbuilt,
was
it's
holding a,
inherent,
I'm sorry?
it's inbuilt and inherent in the ethos.
That's right. That's right. It is the very core of who we are and what our identities are. So, for the longest time, and I get goose flesh even now when I say it, is that I saw myself as a good daughter who was doing what she was supposed to do. Or, in other roles that many people come and tell me that, what is this caregiver thing? Caregiver is that person you hire to do a set of tasks. But if you think about another definition, which is that a caregiver is someone who worries for another person, another animal, or nature, then all of us are caregivers. Yeah. And the biggest burden of being a caregiver can sometimes be that you feel you're alone. And in fact, you're not. There are many who have gone through a similar journey, and there are many who are going through that journey. And I just wish that in this time and age of technology and many other ways of connecting and reconnecting, we can help family caregivers who have to provide long term care not feel alone. But there are many things that caregivers have to account for. So there is a socio-cultural background, like we spoke about. There is a burden when women are caregivers and when men are caregivers. Very clearly, when my husband cooks in the house, he's so cool and he's so supportive, and I should be so grateful that he does what he does. But, when I do a set of things, it's not the same, right? And what that does is, so we have a lot of stories that unconsciously in our socio-cultural milieu drive what is an expectation from a caregiver in general. So there is a Shravan Kumar, there is a Savitri, there is a whoever else, which are ideals in our society, which drive norms. And then there is this whole gender thing. So whether it is through films or it is through advertisements or it is through stories, we are repeatedly told Women put families first, they think about their children first, they sacrifice themselves and, whatever else, reinforcing an idea that thinking about yourself is selfish or not enough, etc. So, sacrificing martyrdom of the caregiver is very haloed, right? And despite the discourse on self care, I have to tell you my own story. I've had huge anger and resentment about self care because I feel if I care for someone else and I have been a caregiver, why shouldn't someone else care for me? Why do I have to care for myself also? And I believe that's how it works. And the idea is that we are alive only when we care for someone else. And the legendary anthropologist Margaret Mead said it beautifully, right, in a conference, that the first sign of civilization is a healed femur bone, which means somebody worried about a person enough to care for them till they healed. That's the sign of a civilization. That's what makes us alive. That's why caregivers are important, but they are a part of our identity, and increasingly we need them more. So I hope I have addressed your question in my ramble.
Yes, Bhavna. And in fact, it's really a lot of food for thought. So, let's also look at beyond, how we look at self-care.
Yeah.
Can we create a care forward? It's like a whole
Yeah,
food chain, and are we cognizant of it? And I think that's a great takeaway. For each one to be responsible to give forward, as you receive,
yeah,
and it may not necessarily be the same reciprocation. It could be anybody in the cycle who can provide
that's
that
right.
for you. And I think that's a great one. We'll come back with a follow-up question for you. Thank you so much, Bhavna. Okay, so let's now move to the organizational perspective. So let's take on the question. Next question is for Sunu. Sunu, well-being is a word hardly heard in organizations 5 years ago. And post-COVID, it has gathered some traction. Some I will qualify it, and I'd like to hear your opinion on that too. I'd like you to take us through some of the innovative practices that have helped the well-being of employees. And certainly, if you'd like, we'll all like to hear this happiness index or the happiness goals that you have put in place at Access Securities, because it's obviously something which is very different and it's not really been thought about or practiced as much. So over to you, Sunu.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much, Geeta, for inviting us, and in gratitude to be with such a passionate and diverse panelists here. Uh, in terms of well-being, I echo your thoughts. Yes, earlier it was, some one little corner, agenda point in the organization. It could be somebody running an EAP or having some little names on well-being, whether it's doing a Zumba class or doing just a little bit, dance therapies, but it wouldn't really integrate into mainstream corporate. So I think that is where my team and me, we have tried to analyze and understand how do we integrate well-being into mainstream corporate agenda rather than it just being something in the corner and we look at it when we are in crisis. So just to give a simple example, when we are doing even workshops or we are doing anything that requires an opportunity to self-reflect and grow, any learning interventions. So we would have psychology as again one place. So in some introducing certain modalities like a psychodrama or a dance movement therapy, which we integrated into mainstream corporate to whether it's for team building, whether it's for conflict resolution, whether it's for collaboration. And it has hit at a different path altogether. So the earlier way of absorbing knowledge would be, okay, you learn the theory, you do certain role plays, you do a little exchange in the training sessions, and it's absorbed for that time being. But when we've involved psychological modalities, it has hit them at personal level. So the absorption of learning has been different altogether. We did start measuring well-being. Initially, traditionally in corporates, we usually do an annual health check, which is in terms of employee satisfaction surveys. So traditionally, you would measure job satisfaction understand manager relationships, understand, whether you have certain cohesive groups in the organization. What we introduced with our partners was an index to measure happiness and stress levels, and look at it in correlation with satisfaction, with cohesion, etc. So that gave a different spectrum. Not necessarily that the employees who are satisfied would be happy and vice versa. So it was a common notion that we would assume that if you're satisfied, you are happy, or if you're satisfied, you have low stress levels. All these assumptions really went for a toss, and it was quite eye-opening for us. While I could share a little bit. Yes, so we did come in the first top 10 places of being the best happy organization, but we also observed stress levels. Now, it could be eustress or de-stress, so there could be differences in understanding the stress levels. But yes, it was just coming out of the pandemic and absorbing and understanding those stress levels in conjunction with your, ENPS scores, your employee net promoter score. So again, a lot of assumptions got decoded for us in that forum. Taking to what Suhela said, we also invest a lot of time and energy in equity, diversity, equity, inclusion. Our representation, India representation, is lower than Saudi Arabia as well. So, when that came in the forefront, it was a knock on our heads, what's happening? So simple measures, what gets measured gets improved. We started doing simple data analytics in terms of, how many women are leaving the workforce, how many are we hiring, how many are getting promoted, how many, are in senior roles. So we understood that just by measuring them and having a little agenda behind it, I think that really helped us even opening our doors for more women participation. We started some activities like initiatives like Women in Motion, where we've gone to youth women to make them understand that when and at what points do women exit out of workforce. And it's important for them to have that envision right in the beginning. It's, of course, usually in India in terms of, during life changes, when it is marriage, when it is childbirth, when you are, a caregiver. And to what Bhavna mentioned, we were wondering that what is happening when we are giving all the flexibility. I'm speaking for the corporates in general. What is happening when women have the flexibility? Why do we have the attrition so high in the organizations for women leaving us? And caregiving came up as the most important reason. It was assumed that if you are at home, being a little patriarchal society that we are, that, if the child is crying, it's the woman who has to get up and attend to the child, or if it's the in-laws asking for food, it's the woman who will get up and do that. And it was so much of tension and pressure from, both the ends. So they decided it's better to stick and, do my one job at home rather than, I balance both the things. So we were actually losing women workforce because of caregiving. That was quite an eye-opener, where we thought, in fact, flexibility and flexible timings will help retain and hire more workforce, but that didn't happen. One of a very important conglomerates went ahead and declared a policy on domestic violence, because when the offices shifted at home, it was the organization's duty to give them a safe environment there too. So I think these have been some very innovative practices that corporates have come up with. Last week, we have inaugurated a pod, which is Pause for Purpose. So it's a conscious pause that, somebody can take in, and it would depend on what you want to do. It could be scribble a drawing. It could be just writing a journal paper. It could be practicing yoga. It could be listening to music. And having in-house counselors have helped us. I'm sure EAP helps most of them, but in India, having a face to somebody where you're expressing your deepest concerns and deepest fears, I think that really changes the needle. When you have somebody constant and regular and whom you can build that rapport and trust. And we've seen a ripple effect. Once you cause that awareness and attentive levels in the employee, they carry those conversations back home, and larger to the society, the awareness of mental health well-being improvises. So that's the ripple effect we've observed, and we keep on trying and nudging and understanding different perspectives rather than just being like a one notion workshop on physical well-being, mental well-being, social well-being, or psychological well-being. So it's about hearing stories and again reorganizing ourselves to what the individual needs are rather than just having a common forum for all. So I hope I've addressed some of your questions. If there's anything remaining, to let me know.
This is so wonderful. I think there's so many small tweaks that can actually, as you said, ripple and exponential impact across not just the individual, but across the society, And I think, and this was really, really like a bummer that caregiving seems to be one reason. I guess no one is even talking about it in the economic sense. Is, this could be possibly one of the biggest reason why women are dropping out of the workforce. And I guess now organizations need to recognize it and put things in terms. And I'm sure now Bhavna's already got her agenda worked out that this is something that offering organizations policies around caregiving or assistance around caregiving, so that there is that level which
We
is.
did a couple of studies, Geeta, and I'm happy to share those details. We did studies that indicated that caregiving is the top reason for women leaving the workforce.
Right. Yeah.
We have
Wonderful.
data.
Yes. So I think there's lots to carry back with in this particular, and so many things that are so easy to kind of navigate. All right. So let's now go into the Varudhini. We'd like to now look at probably the mental health impact and aspects of this whole thing of, what the burden of for different labor women are, expected to hold and carry. So as a psychological counselor with individuals and organizations, why do you think and what are the terms, are they significantly different, the mental health issues which probably women and men encounter? And is there a difference in also how they deal with it?
Yes. Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me on this panel discussion. So the perspective I can tell you is both. There are two aspects to this mental health in terms of a counseling psychologist. One is, what are the mental health constraints or variables that affect women? And I think you did a beautiful job in the beginning where you were explaining all the things that the social construct related to why women could be hampered in their own, or how that affects their own personal experiences. So that's one aspect. The second aspect would be, when women seek help, what they are there for. So since we've been speaking a lot about the social constructs and all of that, which we invariably know because we experience it as well, me as a woman. But if we kept that aside and just looked at women who come in for counseling, the one thing that I have seen in my practice, and there's enough research out there, is that when you look at the family dynamic, and husband, wife, children, extended family, because in our Indian society, that's an integral part. The family functionality, or when we will term it as a family being dysfunctional, and this word dysfunction is being used a lot more rampantly among people, we will always see there's a breakdown in a woman's health, predominantly that determines the family functionality, which means that the backbone of mental health in a family is predominantly on the woman's shoulder. Okay, so family members' mental health is also somehow the responsibility of the woman, children, husband, family, everything. So, and I think all of you were talking about it, where there's so many roles and support she has to give. And if she's not doing it, she has a guilt that, okay, I'm not doing my job, that invariably there's no time to focus on oneself, right? So the first part of this is even when you see women's attrition, because I work so much with corporates as well, women attrition would be if they're in their late, like before 40 years old, if there's attrition rate there, if it isn't for old age caregiving, it would be for children, because that's when children, adolescents are going through a really tough time. And it's invariable that the woman chooses to say, okay, no, I will stop it and I will be there. I'll be at home. I'll make sure that, they go for their therapies, or they do this or they do that, right? So what I find very interesting is when women majority of them bring their children to me. And when I'm doing or working with the children, I somehow rope in the woman, because for me, I know that's the backbone of the family. So I say, come on, like, you know, when I come in and I start working with her, I clearly see that this is where I do it. So once they come in and they experience what therapy is about and how it works, there's such a shift in their ability to look at themselves as an individual and how they do need to take care of themselves. And primarily, if they are not doing well, everyone would think it's because of their children, right? Actually, it's not from there. It's from their spousal relationship. It is from their spousal relationship. If the partnership between a husband and wife is healthy, they're supportive, a woman has so much strength to be able to work on every other dimension. There's a space for her individuality. There's a space for her personal experiences to be heard. And that takes care of her mental. Women are more resilient than you would ever think them possible when this primary support is healthy. So I think this is one dimension that gets so camouflaged, you know. Women are like, okay, you know, every time, right, a woman comes in, they'll be like, the family comes in all concerned, yes, yes, please help. You know, she's not doing well and all of that, right? And they come in and say, you know, because of her biological sex, she has, you know, she has a predisposition for depression, she can be oversensitive, all of these things, right? So the moment you kind of negate a woman's personal journey because of her biology, it's just so infuriating for me inside personally. But then I have to kind of be clever about like, how do I kind of help them understand that there's so much here that they're doing here. And once I rope in the husband in and I start work there, there's a huge shift in the family automatically. So when a family comes to me, I always look at the woman's age, birth order, socioeconomic status, education, work occupation, level of occupation. And the biggest thing I do, and I think that would be interesting for this forum, is that I look at what her social construct of her gender role, her definition of how she looks at it. I'm not worried about what society is doing. I want to understand her role. What does she define her gender role as? And that for me is very, very important. Did I go over my time? I'm so sorry if I did.
Yeah. Don't worry. I think it was so engaging.
On this.
It's this whole, you know, it's so beautifully stringing, starting from what Sohela said to what Bhavna added to how it plays out in the organization, to actually you giving us the entire, you know, the psychosocial, cultural context of what happens. So here's the starting question. It's a follow-up question, but then once Varu answers it, I'd like all of you to pitch in. You know, there is probably a value which is put, which is where the women struggles in terms of asking for help. Not asking for help and, you know, being available is supposed to be, you know, as it's supposed to be something that ought to be done by a woman. And of course, it takes a lot of toll, and even looking at the stigma which is attached to mental health, you know, the whole thing. So how would you look at what are the typical stigmas because of which you feel, you know, them asking for help itself is, I mean, you have to do it indirectly, you know.
Yes.
Why is it not possible, and where can we move the needle here?
Well, what's very interesting is that the younger generation we're living with, have a huge different perspective to mental health and therapy. They think it's cool and hip, one social middle class and above, to have a therapist. And they're having an open dialogue about saying, yeah, I'm going to go talk about this to my therapist. And they're like, oh, what did your therapist say? You mean, because this is now it's hip, it's cool to have that. Which is great, because you know why? They're the ones who go home and say, Mom, you might need someone to talk to. So I have a lot of clients when they do come individually, when a woman sets up her appointment, invariably 60% of the time it would be because her child, her children, adolescent, young adults who've told them, go for therapy, talk to someone, talk to someone, talk to someone. So the stigma is, I'll tell you, in my practice, I have seen in Indian context, and I will only talk about it in Indian context. If you want, I can talk about it from US and from Canada, but from Indian context, the thing about it is when you go for therapy, it is seen like something is fundamentally wrong. You're failing in coping with life, which means that there's the way you perceive the person is powerless. Now, what happens in that is if her in-laws or extended family get to know she's going in therapy, it's very quick for people to pass judgment. Oh, yeah, she's oversensitive. Or even if she's about to say something, they'll be like, yeah, don't say it. You know, she's in therapy. She's going through a lot. She's looking at it. Like there's this type of family, and we don't even know we're doing it. But what we do is when we negate a woman's experience and her voice and say, okay, that's because she's going through something or she's going through depression, we have just cut her empowerment as an individual. And this is one of the biggest problems we have. And that is why I have women who come to me. Clearly, when their husband comes in, she clearly says, please don't tell your parents I'm coming. Please don't tell my parents you're coming. I don't want the family to know. Because it just undermines her value that something is wrong with her within the family. And this is a big myth. And as much as you might think that, okay, education and social status would write that off, I'm sorry, it doesn't. Invariably, this still is there in all socioeconomic backgrounds that I have seen. Okay, I'll pass it.
Anyone would like to add? That was really very insightful. And I think I'm also staying with this whole dysfunctionality in a family, and, looking at that root cause is possibly the woman is not, doesn't have that space to, be well in her own ways. All right. So anybody else would like to add to what this whole stigma around? Even I think it's all so well connected. Yes, Bhavna, it's also connected to this whole caregiving piece. So go ahead.
So, when you say there's a woman in a household, I relate to it from multiple perspectives. I'm a woman in a household. I am someone who grew up in a household where gender was not something that came in my way for how I thought, what I did. Interestingly, that was an enabler, and that was also my disadvantage, right? Sometimes I just didn't feel like I understood what other people may have gone through, or why I was being looked at very differently. So for example, let's say I was having I'm an HR professional. My background is in HR. I've worked in that area for a long time. Now, if I say something like, this is a people behavior thing, very often I will get to hear, you should be able to do this. You're an HR professional. Similarly, when you're a woman, you are expected to be able to deliver emotional labor, care, have it all together, etc. So, without getting very graphic, I like to say that just because you have two X chromosomes means you have some things in place, which is not necessarily true. Because look at me, I grew up and I learned to study something, became a professional in a certain way. I didn't learn how to be a good caregiver, and I stumbled and struggled through that process and felt very lonely. But the fear at that time that I cannot say that I don't know this because I'm just fundamentally expected to know this because I'm a woman in her 20s and 30s. By now, I should know this, can be quite hard. So I remember I didn't know how to run a household when I was newly married, for example. But that unpaid care work was a huge expectation from me, not necessarily my husband. Even from a very progressive mother. Yes, Sohaila.
No, thank you so much for sharing these thoughts. I just was reflecting and taking from your point, Varu, I was just reflecting that how that reality would be different for a woman in a rural setting in India. Where we know that the technology, of course, has not reached to the level that
Yeah.
ideally we have liked to see. The awareness among the kids here, which are really supporting, and taking it to the next level, not things doesn't exist that way. So, of course, the stigma and the challenges faced by women in rural communities would be extremely harsh and extremely difficult. And I'm not sure if if you would have anything to say on that as well.
Yes. So thank you for asking me this, because there is a big difference. There is a big difference in the way we word things. So a part of what Interconnect does is we do 30% of forms of workshops and things like that, which are trying to educate the rural, I won't say rural, but just socioeconomic status, which do not get these services like therapy available for them. We try and do more community-based programs, because when we do that, like, oh, how can you, use food to help you to get over your, and the word I use is man shanti, meaning like your shanti for your man. Like, like we use words that are extremely like very like approachable and a lot more not related to, we don't call it anything like mental health. We don't use any of those words, just so that if there are people who are able to understand that, there are things you can do. Like, for example, what gets you man shanti? Do you like to go for a walk? Do you do that in your day? Do you do that? So very, very indirectly, we approach it. The only difference is that in this type of population, when they see people which are not neurotypical behaviors, they just categorize them as mad, to be honest, like they are mad. And there's no other polite word using that for them. And then what happens is these women are constantly fighting and saying, I'm not mad, I'm not mad. And then what they do is they refuse to get help, because if they do, that means they are mad. So it's like a catch-22, right? And so then they don't want to do the treatment. They don't want to go for that. So there's still a lot of work in area of mental health. And all the progress we've made with mental health in India, especially over the last couple, especially with COVID, has been wonderful. But if I can take a couple of seconds, there's one big problem we're facing, which is that there's overemphasis to say, oh, it's okay to not be okay. And that slogan is everywhere, right? But it's incomplete. That incompletion is that it's okay to be not okay, but there is support you need to get. It does not define you. And that's where people are stuck. I'm so sorry, we're having a huge problem with a lot of people coming and saying, I'm depressed and that's it. They think that's it. And this is something that I'm trying in all platforms to educate more people, that it isn't complete. That message is not complete. You are not complete with just being labeled. There's a lot more other things that you need to look at.
So thank you for, I'm sorry, I'll just bring in a couple of sentences, sorry.
Yes.
Suhela, thank you for bringing in the voice of women from, parts of the world who might not be represented here right now, right? So it is very important. But because we're talking about well-being, I'd like for us to kind of keep in mind that mental health is but a subset of well-being. And like
Yes.
Geeta introduced the session, a big part of our well-being is our agency and our expression, our choice making. And all of that is suppressed and curbed, either because you don't have digital access,
Yeah.
or because you don't have financial access. At the end of the day, We need financial resources and money to be able to have a voice and say something. And therefore, well-being is certainly compromised. And over a period of time, our response to that stressful environment can lead to mental health challenges as well.
Absolutely.
It's all so deeply interconnected. And thank you so much. We have a couple of questions as we move for the audience, and I'll leave it to whoever wants to take it first. The first question that has come is: working mothers spend more time on work, household labor, childcare than fathers, as many can't afford childcare, which creates a lot of burden for them. What specific actions can organizations take to improve working conditions for women? So I guess I'd leave it to Sunu unless someone else also wants to pitch in, starting first.
So I missed the first part of it. I lost the connect.
Yeah, let me just repeat it for you.
Right.
It says working mothers spend more time on work and household labor, including childcare, than fathers, as many can't afford childcare. So, this entitlement. I remember Sheryl Sandberg saying that, I mean, it's so easy to, if you're entitled, you keep another woman, there to look after your family and domestic. But everybody does not have the access that Sohela also brought out. So therefore, as organization, what is it that, one can?
Yeah, definitely. As per our policy also, in terms of our maternity act, we have the need to have creches at workplace, but of course it's not as doable as it sounds. So there are certain corporates who have that facility, and hence the burden sort of reduces. In fact, I've seen men using that facility more than the women. And owing to the pandemic, I think it gave a little stop to that. But I think overall, in terms of what flexibilities can we give, like as I told you, during the pandemic, there was this uproar of women wanting to come back to work and not wanting to work from home. And we tried to tweak timings. So we gave them their dinner making and lunch making timing off, so they could do those chores that time and take work when it's, after your child has slept. So, giving that flexibility, not just randomly, but understanding where is it that they want more, and creating policies around it. So it's always not that everything will come in a policy format, but how does one manager or the reporting manager or the leader empathizes with the situation and tweak your ways in the overall format that is given. So these were little tweaks which we did, and they were very helpful. They were very happy with those changes because they could balance the home and they could work when there was no noise. So I think that's how individually we could come up with. Somebody may need a sabbatical, some may need flexibility, some may just need a voice out. It's not always that you need some policies. At least be patient with what I have to say. Can I just rant it out in the office and feel okay about it? So it could be different people wanting their different needs to be met.
So true. Sohela, you were raised your hand.
I just want to give this slogan, which we really, I like very much and has been created as part of our training intervention, which is Ghar ka kaam, sabka kaam, which really means that we have to start, also talking about when we ask our daughters to take the glass of water away, we should also ask our sons to be able to do the exact same thing. So these conversations have to start from our families, from our own lived experiences. But also we definitely need to, there is organizationally, we really promote 3 or 4 hours strategy, which is first recognize, reduce, redistribute, and reward unpaid work, which means that governments the public infrastructure should be such which should be able to take care of the care burden, unprecedented care burden that is faced by women, and also the corporate policies and practices. But also at the national level, we definitely should have a national care policy at the country level to address some of these challenges.
And we've also started recognizing housework as work, as what Suela said. So in fact, it was not that everything gets made in a closed room. There was somebody who came up with her profile where she said, I'm the CEO of the Sharma household. She's also the CFO. She plans annual budgets. She's a chief engagement officer. She's also the marketing officer. And that is, and we actually could, design with those skill sets, give her an appropriate profile match. So that is something which ticked us that yes, of course, it's time that we recognize how we work as work and not a gap in the career or not a fresher tag that needs to be put up. That was an eye opener for us as well.
Very true.
Yeah,
That's
it was a
wonderful.
brilliant ad. I'm going to add a little bit, Geeta, to that question. So thank
Sure.
you for bringing the UN slogan, Suhela. It's like my go-to right now, especially the piece around the 4 Rs, right?
Yes.
But here are some things that organizations can do. Organizations provide flexibility to women and recognize. But it is important to recognize that it's not just maternity leave, it's parental leave. It's caregiving. So I think what organizations need to do is incentivize men to take time off for parenting. Second, a large number of times, and I have been in fairly competitive organizations, my organization said, you can go home, you have a small child. I didn't want to go. Why would I want to leave a meeting and leave the decision making to the other people? Why would that meeting not happen in not non-office hours, for example? And why would, parenting not be recognized as a responsibility? So there was, I'm obviously talking about a long time ago, but it was almost like, a child couldn't, a man couldn't say in the office that I have babysitting responsibilities, or I have to go for parent teacher association. It should be normalized that fathers can do parent teacher meetings, fathers are responsible for babysitting, and that parental leave is as much a father's responsibility as it is the woman's responsibility. So I think what organizations can also do is help men highlight their challenges. So can there be safe spaces for men to talk about what it means to have a working woman for their partner? And women have to know that bringing up a child takes a village. So you don't have to do it alone. Please recruit your husband to do most of the 50% of the work, your family members, your neighbors, your helpers. You have to recruit the village in the task of bringing up your child, or the work that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. And we still have another very interesting aspect, but I think in the interest of time, it's this whole single women and the whole dimension of what happens at the, at every stage of what we have talked about. And I think that's another piece. Maybe we'll have another series of conversations around it since Nikita is here. So I'm just going to ask you all through whatever your lived realities is and where would you like to move the needle, your top 3, let me say just top 1 thing that is critical to enhance the well-being of women. Just let's go round robin. So Varudhini, over to you as we are wrapping up. You're mute.
So the top thing I would say is to focus on self-care. And what I mean by self-care is it's on food. Your relationship with food and weight is very, very important. And so they're 2 separate things, but I'm going to talk about that's one. Second is on learning to understand what you make a list of things you want to do personally, not with as a mother, as a no, just as you, as if it was me, what would I like to do? Like I said, pottery. Fingers crossed, hopefully in the next 5 years, I'll get around to it. But that's my goal. Take care of food. Food's so important.
Okay, so who's next?
I can go
Suhela,
next.
yes.
Yeah, for me, it would be freedom from violence. The right of a woman to be free from fear of violence in all spheres and all spaces.
Yeah, and adding to that, safety. I think this whole the safety of physical as well as emotional safety. Thank you so much, Sohela and Varu. So who'll go next, Bhavna?
So I'm going to build on what both Varu and Suhela said. So feed your body, but feed your soul. I hope all women become motorcycle riders. And you feed your soul, whether through pottery or through motorcycle riding or through whatever feeds your soul. But please feed your soul, express yourself. and express yourself through whatever your voice is. So the second thing I'd say is give voice to your unique story. As one of my favorite writers says, "Bol ke lab azad hain tere." So
So would you like to translate it for the
yes,
international
I'm so sorry.
audience?
Yes, I'm so sorry. So one of my favorite authors, Fez, says, speak up because your lips are, after all, free, or your voice is of value. So
Oh,
it's a
wonderful.
beautiful poem. I'm sure you can get the translation.
Thank you so much, Bhavna. Over to you,
Yeah.
Sunu.
Yeah, so again, to what Bhavna said towards the end, express is a very strong word for me, and express your truth and express it without fear. So, it's like even in workshops, if we ask them, what's your purpose statement, what's your happy statement, to keep my family happy, to keep my to get my son or daughters XYZ. So it's always about the others, or it's about the circle around you, but you're not reflecting whether it's your pottery that you're doing or whether you want to ride the bike. So what's about you? So express your own truth and without any fear of judgments.
How wonderful is that? So yes, we are at a wrap, but I see there are a lot of audience questions still. Please keep them on. We'll probably answer them aside as I thank Sohela, Bhavna, Sunu, and Baru for such an insightful, engaging conversation. And I guess each one of us is taking back, the audience and me personally, and I think each one of us in the panel itself, so many new lines of thought that we are carrying back with us. And that those are all ways in which women and men can create a much happier world for all. Thank you, audience, for such an active participation. Please feel free and definitely provide feedback on the session and the platform at the end. Over to you, Nikita. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. Thank you, Talentnomics. It has been really, really wonderful speaking to all of you. You're more friends than, so that's why it makes it so much easier. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Nice day ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Geeta, and all the amazing panelists for sharing their, what I would say, wellness wisdom with us. I think that touched inside so deep down. I mean, we admit it or not, we are all fighting some kind of a battle within. I think it's time that we start opening up for that. I'm sure after this session, all of us have made a note of at least one action that we can start doing differently, whether it's self-care, as it was said, whether it's about feeding your soul, keeping yourself safe, but one thing that you start doing for yourself and for your own happiness. With nothing much to say, nothing much to add to this, it's been so enriching already. With this, we are at the end of day one already. Lot of takeaways, lots of inspiration, and lot of new ideas. While we ponder over all of this, or maybe some of this gradually, it was a lot to take in. Disha and I will take your leave, let you rest, and come back tomorrow, all geared up for the next round of what is going to be very insightful discussions again. So goodbye, good night, and good day to those getting to work. See you tomorrow. Once again, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.